And the Oscar goes to...
Octavia Spencer for Ma.
Just like the 2019 horror masterpiece Ma, many of her favorite cult classics have been snubbed. Robbed, even. It's crazy to think about how so many of the most influential horror films of all time never got any sort of recognition at the Oscars, not even a technical nomination. However, the horror genre not being properly recognized by the Academy isn't any sort of new discussion that hasn't already been had. What I want to do today is go over what horror films have been nominated or even brought home a statuette over the years. I've compiled a list of every single horror film that's ever been nominated for an Oscar, whether for a single technical category or one big that year, starting from the beginning to now. While a lot of people believe that the first horror film to ever be nominated for an Oscar was the 1935 Bride of Frankenstein for Best Sound, there were actually two before that to be nominated. Those include Svengali in 1931 for Best Cinematography and Best Art Direction, as well as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1932 for Best Writing Adaptation, Best Cinematography, and Best Leading Actor, which actually ended up winning. In 1940, The Hunchback of Notre Dame was nominated for Best Sound and Best Original Score. In 1941, there were three horror films to be nominated for Oscars, including Dr. Cyclops and The Invisible Man Returns for Best Special Effects. The same year, the horror comedy You'll Find Out was nominated for Best Original Song for I'd Know You Anywhere. In 1942, the third adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was nominated for three categories, including Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Original Score, which the horror comedy titled King of Zombies was also nominated for. In 1944, an adaptation of the 1925 horror musical classic The Phantom of the Opera was nominated in four categories and brought home 2 wins that night. It was nominated for Best Sound and Best Scoring, and won Best Cinematography and Best Art Direction. The 2004 adaptation went on to be nominated for 3 Oscars as well, but since it was labeled as a romance musical, it isn't included later down in the list. In 1945, The Climax was nominated for Best Art Direction, and The Uninvited was nominated for Best Cinematography. In 1946, The Picture of Dorian Gray won for Best Cinematography and was also nominated for Best Supporting Actress and Best Art Direction. This was the first time an actress received a nomination for a horror film at the Oscars, which was immediately followed in 1946 with another Best Supporting Actress nomination for the film The Spiral Staircase. A decade later, the killer kid drama The Bad Seed secured 4 nominations, 2 for Best Supporting Actress, a nomination for Best Lead Actress, as well as Best Cinematography. Then in 1961, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho landed Janet Leigh a Best Supporting Actress nomination. Psycho was also nominated that year for Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Art Direction, but unfortunately lost in all categories, though to this day, Psycho is widely known as one of the most influential horror films ever made, as well as one of, if not the greatest ever made. That same year, the film Midnight Lace received a nomination for Best Costume Design. 1963 was another big year for horror when Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, directed by Robert Aldrich, starring Bette Davis, received 5 nominations and 1 win for Best Costume Design. It was also nominated for Best Leading Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Cinematography, and Best Sound. Until 2 years later in 1965 when Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, another film directed by Robert Aldrich starring Bette Davis, was nominated in 7 categories. It was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Editing, Best Original Song, and Best Original Score. In between these, Alfred Hitchcock's The Bird surprisingly only received 1 nomination for Best Visual Effects in 1964. Then in 1966, the Japanese film Kwaidan received a nomination for Best Foreign Language Film, making it the first and only non-English horror film to be nominated for an Oscar. And of course, later on in 2020, Parasite not only won Best Picture, but also Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best International Film. However, since it's labeled as a thriller, not a horror, I will not be including it later on, but I just had to mention it. In 1967, the science fiction horror Seconds received a nomination for Best Cinematography for its experimental camera work with its handheld and other bizarre camera techniques. In 1988, Audrey Hepburn received a Best Leading Actress nomination for the film Wait Until Dark, directed by Terrence Young. It has become evident at this point that a lot of women have been getting nominations for their performances in a lot of horror films, despite no one winning yet, but this changed in 1969 with Rosemary's Baby, directed by... Hold on. I didn't write down a director. Oh, that movie doesn't have a director. Rosemary's Baby doesn't have a director, I forgot. It was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay and brought home a win for Ruth Gordon as Best Supporting Actress. The win for Best Supporting Actress was the first famously known high-profit Academy Award win for a horror film and kickstarted the phenomenon of actresses earning statuettes for their roles in horror. Also released in 1968 was Night of the Living Dead, which did not earn any nominations when award season came around, despite popularizing an entire subgenre of zombie horror and having a major influence on many of its successors. In 1973, the killer rat film Ben received a Best Original Song nomination, and the Robert Altman horror mystery film Images was nominated for Best Original Score. In 1974, the campy rock opera hybrid of Phantom of the Opera and Faust, titled Phantom of the Paradise, received a nomination for Best Original Score. Then, history was made with not only the most amount of nominations a horror film had ever received by that time, but the most amount a horror film has ever received to this day. That film was none other than The Exorcist, landing 10 nominations and surprisingly only 2 wins. It won for Best Original Screenplay and Best Sound, and received nominations for Best Picture, Best Leading Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, and Best Editing. This was the first horror film to ever be nominated for Best Picture, which it ultimately ended up losing to The Sting. 1976 was supposed to be another huge year for horror at the Oscars, at least that's what a young Steven Spielberg thought.
My name is Steve Spielberg, and I just directed a movie called Jaws. And Jaws is about to be nominated in 11 categories. You're about to see us sweep the nominations.
At age 27, Spielberg directed what is now known to be one of the most infamous films of all time. They made back the production costs of $9 million on opening weekend, and by the first 10 days it had grossed $21 million. After the first 60 days, Jaws had made over $100 million during its theatrical release. This is important to note because it's clear that the movie had an immediate success and was expected to win big at the 1976 Academy Awards, so much so that Spielberg hired a videographer to record his reaction to the live nominee ceremony, expecting to land 11 nominations and one up The Exorcist. However, him and his team were very shocked to see Jaws had only landed 4 nominations, not including Best Director like they anticipated.
Oh, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I wasn't nominated. I got beaten out by Fellini.
They did, however, land a Best Picture nomination as well as Best Original Score, Best Editing, and Best Sound, which they ended up winning all 4 except for Best Picture. In 1977, Best Original Score went to the Devil Baby horror thriller, The Omen, which was also nominated for Best Original Song. The same year, the first Stephen King adapted film, Carrie, received 2 nominations for Best Leading Actress and Best Supporting Actress, but unfortunately didn't win in either category. In 1980, the first film in the Alien franchise received a nomination for Best Art Direction and won Best Visual Effects. The same year, the Amityville Horror received a nomination for Best Original Score. Then, in 1982, one of my all-time favorite films, An American Werewolf in London, became the first horror film to win an Oscar for Best Makeup for its wonderful SFX. This was the first of 7 Academy Awards for legendary makeup artist Rick Baker throughout his career. Some of his other notable work includes How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Nutty Professor, Men in Black, Videodrome, Michael Jackson's Thriller music video, most recently, the 2010 adaptation of The Wolfman. Also in 1982, the science fiction horror thriller Altered States received 2 nominations, one for Best Sound and one for Best Original Score. In 1983, the Spielberg written and produced haunted house classic Poltergeist received 3 nominations for Best Visual Effects, Best Sound Effects, and Best Original Score. Ironically, Poltergeist has a PG rating, which if you remember the bathroom scene, seems a bit of a stretch to be a family-friendly film, especially considering the director Tobe Hooper is most famously known for also directing the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In 1987, the David Cronenberg body horror extravaganza The Fly won an Oscar for Best Makeup. The same year, the horror musical Little Shop of Horrors received 2 nominations for Best Visual Effects and Best Original Song for the song Mean Green Mother from Outer Space. Poltergeist 2 was also nominated that year for Best Visual Effects as well, but both lost to Aliens, the second film in the Alien franchise. Aliens had a huge year at the Oscars and landed 7 nominations with 2 wins. It won for Best Sound Effects and Best Visual Effects and was nominated for Best Leading Actress, Best Art Direction, Best Sound, Best Editing, and Best Original Score. Though this isn't exactly horror, I want to discuss it anyways. In 1989, Tim Burton's Beetlejuice won an Oscar for Best Makeup. While Beetlejuice is labeled as a fantasy comedy, it is beloved by the horror community and I felt it was worth a mention. In 1991, the film Flatliners, starring Julia Roberts about a group of medical students testing whether there really is life after death, was nominated for Best Sound Effects. In the same year, a young Kathy Bates won Best Leading Actress for her role in Misery. I don't know why I said a young Kathy Bates. She was fully 41 years old when she made that movie. 41 years young. 1992. was the biggest year for horror at the Oscars, and that was the year of the Silence of the Lambs sweep. While it wasn't nominated as many times as The Exorcist was, it won in 5 of 7 categories, including every single major category. It won for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, Anthony Hopkins won Best Leading Actor, Jodie Foster won Best Leading Actress, and Jonathan Demme won Best Director. It was also nominated for Best Sound and Best Editing. To this day, Silence of the Lambs is the only horror film to ever earn Hollywood's top prize of winning for all 3 artists as well as its Best Picture. In 1993, Alien 3 was nominated for Best Visual Effects, but lost to Meryl Streep's witchy horror comedy Death Becomes Her. The same year, Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, won 3 out of 4 nominations it received. It won for Best Costume Design, Best Sound Effects, and Best Makeup, and lost in Best Art Direction. In 1995, the Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, and Kirsten Dunst vampire flick Interview with the Vampire was nominated for Best Art Direction and Best Original Score. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was also nominated that year for Best Makeup, and honestly, it confuses me how so many of these modern adaptations and remakes of Universal classic monster movies have received nominations for various awards while the originals themselves never received any back in the day. Bela Lugosi's Dracula, James Whales's Frankenstein and the Invisible Man, Jack Arnold's Creature from the Black Lagoon, all were respectfully robbed despite being critically better than any of their remakes that received nominations over the years. In the year 2000, M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense became the 4th ever horror film to be nominated for Best Picture, alongside a handful of other nominations such as Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Editing. That same year, Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow was nominated for Best Cinematography and Best Costume Design, and won for Best Production Design. In 2001, The Cell starring Jennifer Lopez received a nomination for Best Makeup, as well as the film Shadow of the Vampire that landed Willem Dafoe a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Then it wasn't until 7 years later that horror would receive a nomination until 2008, when Tim Burton's horror musical Sweeney Todd got 3 nominations for Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, and Best Lead Actor for Johnny Depp. Then in 2011, Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan landed 5 nominations, including Best Picture, making it the 5th horror film to ever be nominated in that category. It was also nominated for Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and won for Best Leading Actress for Natalie Portman's performance. The same year, Rick Baker won Best Makeup for The Wolfman, as I mentioned earlier. The 6th and final horror film to ever be nominated for Best Picture is Jordan Peele's directing debut Get Out. It only won for Best Screenplay, but was also nominated for Best Director and Best Lead Actor for Daniel Kaluuya's performance. In 2019, A Quiet Place was nominated for Best Sound Editing. Though a majority of the film is spent with very minimal noise and dialogue, there is a very deep and concentrated focus on all the small sounds that typically wouldn't be given as much attention in louder films. Now, we have reached the end of the line with 2020. The last horror film as of 2023 to be given a nomination by the Oscars would be Robert Edgar's The Lighthouse for Best Cinematography. Now that we've gone over every single horror film to ever receive an Academy Awards nomination, let's go over what hasn't. The Thing not receiving a nomination for makeup or visual effects, The Shining not receiving a nomination for the infamous performances by Jack Nicholson or Shelley Duvall, Suspiria not receiving a nomination for its vibrant and unforgettable cinematography, and more recently, one that I still hold a very strong grudge about, Hereditary not receiving a nomination for Toni Collette's outstanding performance. Some other films that didn't receive nominations despite box office success or just incredible filmmaking include Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Possession, Videodrome, The Blair Witch Project, The Wicker Man, Scream, and Evil Dead 2. Okay, I might be a little bit biased on Evil Dead 2, not to mention all of the work Ari Aster and Jordan Peele have put out in recent years. I feel as if every film from the both of them were all worthy of some sort of nomination and have been disappointed each year that they've been robbed. Though Get Out did get some rightfully deserved attention from the Academy, I mean it was nominated for Best Picture, I still feel as if Nope and Us were also outstanding films that should have received at the very least a technical nomination. Same goes for Midsommar, which absolutely should have received a Best Leading Actress nomination for Florence Pugh's performance. Ty West is another director I would have absolutely loved to see get some recognition at the Oscars for X or Pearl, especially for Mia Goth's performance. However, I wasn't shocked to see neither of them nominated. I was just disappointed. The horror genre has really been killing it, no pun intended, over recent years, and though receiving an award doesn't dictate what is and isn't a great film, it would be great to see horror taken more seriously as the masterclass of creativity that it is and given more recognition than it has. If you have any ideas as to what kind of future videos you'd like to see from me, feel free to let me know in the comments. I would also love to know what your favorite snubbed horror films are and what you think it should have been nominated for. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.